Can I just come in back to the human rights chapter, and can I particularly draw your attention to the war in Sudan, which is the biggest humanitarian crisis actually since aid began, with 30 million people in food insecurity. And it's my understanding in the GCC free trade agreement that the gold trade and weapons are both out of scope of that agreement. Now, in terms of the gold trade, about 90% of the illicit trade in gold is going through the UAE, and that is sustaining Sudan's civil war, as told by Chatham House reports, and there was an article last week in the New York Times. There's much tougher concerted action needed here that I would hope the UK would lead, but also on weapons. The UAE is playing a central role in arming the RSF that the USA have said is involved in a genocide in Sudan. A New York Times report says this.
To come to a question, because I'm sure the Minister knows the background.
My question is, how does that stack up with what you're saying about the human rights chapter and how it's implicit in everything you do, if it's not within your within the GCC?
Firstly, in terms of the GCC, the UAE is but one of the sovereign entities within the GCC, and we're negotiating via the GCC Secretariat, who lead on trade policy. Now, of course, they're talking to the UAE, along with Bahrain and Qatar and the other members of the GCC. In relation to Sudan, again, I probably have to declare an interest as an old man, but I travelled when I was Development Secretary to Darfur and know quite how profound are the challenges that country continue to face. As indeed, I visited South Sudan and Juba as well. I know that resolving the Sudanese conflict is a personal priority of the Foreign Secretary. The Foreign Secretary has himself convened the conference in relation to Sudan. At the UN Security Council, in language penned by the United Kingdom, let me share with you what was said. Council members urged all member states to refrain from external interference which seeks to foment conflict and instability, and instead to support efforts for durable peace, and reminded all parties to the conflict and member states to adhere to their obligations to comply with the arms embargo measures as stipulated in paragraph 7 and 8 of Resolution 1556 and reaffirmed and renewed in Resolution 2750. So there is an arms embargo on Sudan, which the UK is absolute in standing behind and supporting. In relation to the UAE, any military exports are governed by the Strategic Arms Export Licence criteria, which means they're judged on a case-by-case basis. We seek assurances from any country to whom arms are being exported in relation to the end user. And in that sense, the UK is very clear in a deep bilateral relationship with the UAE as to its responsibilities as well as our responsibilities in relation to this conflict. We are unaware of instances of weapons being passported through the UAE to Sudan, as you describe, and if you're aware of any evidence to that effect, of course we would be grateful to receive it.
Thank you. Well, just running with that, one part of economic security is a register of foreign-owned assets in the UK, and this has been talked about a lot by the last government, and I was hoping that, maybe not on the spot now, but whether you'd reply in writing about when this government's going to commit to a full register of properties and businesses which are owned by foreign parties being in the public domain, because that would be very helpful. And then going back to kind of the UAE-Sudan situation, some things that would be really helpful would be whether or not gold and weapons are going to be included in the FTA discussions and be properly addressed in that. Whether the UK, from its part, I mean, this is in the public news, the New York Times have reported it globally, so there is a lot of information out there, whether the UK will confirm within 30 days that none of the weapons that we're exporting to the UAE are then being transferred down into Sudan. Two more points, if I may. One is whether the UK will re-examine its arms exports to the UAE, taking into consideration the new information, a la New York Times and others, regarding the alleged transfer of arms, not just the ones we're selling, into Sudan. And that's because, exactly as Douglas mentions, what are our rules? Arms export regulations require that we consider whether exports can be used for human rights violations going on in Sudan, destabilise a region, certainly going on in Sudan, or breach international law, certainly going on in Sudan. And then finally, whether the UK will work with the UAE to sanction the key individuals and companies involved in the smuggling and laundering of conflict gold through the Gulf, including the UAE.
Answer what you can now,
Yes.
and feel free to follow up in writing or indeed on the 9th of September.
Why don't I undertake to write to the committee?
Yeah.
I can't give you the guarantee as to exactly when the UK government is doing what you're asking, but I can guarantee that we will write and set out our thinking in relation to that. The UK has already frozen assets of 9 commercial entities linked to both SAF and RSF, the two principal organisations. And as I say, there's a huge diplomatic effort being led by the Foreign Secretary personally in relation to resolving the Sudan conflict. Just in terms of how the system operates, let me share with you what I can at this stage, and then I'm very happy to write. As with all countries for the UAE, we keep our export licences for military equipment to the UAE under review. On a case-by-case basis against the requirements of our export licensing criteria. This includes specifically an assessment of the risk of diversion to a prescribed destination, and Sudan would meet that threshold in terms of being a prescribed destination. We are not, as a government, aware that UK military equipment being licensed to the UAE is being diverted to Sudan, but we will not grant a licence unless the end user provides a signed undertaking stating, and I quote directly, the goods will not be re-exported or otherwise resold or transferred to a destination subject to UN, EU, UK, OSCE embargo, where that act would be in breach of the terms of that embargo. We expect end users to honour that commitment, and if they do not, we can suspend or revoke licences, and we'll factor that into decisions in relation to any future licences. So in that sense, that's the regime that we're operating. We do not have, within our knowledge, evidence that UK weapons exported to the UAE have found their way to Sudan, but in that sense, I'm very happy to write to the committee.
Doug, many thanks for that. But if I may, it's not just about our weapons. It's about other weapons. If the UAE is transferring weapons into Sudan, which is a bloodbath, then we should be thinking very hard, because we would be breaching our own export regulations because of what their actions are doing with other people's weapons. And that's what I'm looking for your help on as well.
So first of all, if there was evidence that that was happening, that would be a material consideration in terms of the risks of diversion in relation to our own licences. Secondly, we have at the United Nations and at the Security Council made clear our absolute commitment to the arms embargo more broadly in relation to Sudan. And thirdly, we have a deep and enduring bilateral relationship with the UAE, and it is open to us to have those dialogues with not just the UAE, but any other countries about whom we have concerns, and I'd be very happy to write you on those terms.
Thank you. Let's pursue that further, including on the 9th of September, if that's good.